I thought I knew my son inside out, but what he did that night shattered everything I believed in. It started with a knock at my bedroom door past midnight. A moment that seemed innocent, but unraveled into something I never saw coming. As I opened the door and saw the look in his eyes, I realized our lives were about to change forever. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. My name is Sarah, and for most of my life, I thought I had the perfect family. My husband, James, and I built a life filled with love, trust, and 2 beautiful children. But everything changed 2 years ago when James passed away unexpectedly. His loss left a gaping hole in our family, and my son, Liam, and I were left to pick up the pieces. Liam, my 19-year-old son, was once vibrant and full of life. But after his father's death, he became distant and withdrawn. He spent most of his time in his room, barely speaking to me. The silence in the house was deafening, and I felt helpless. I tried everything to support him, cooking his favorite meals, leaving encouraging notes, and reminding him that I was there if he needed me. But it seemed like nothing could pull him out of his shell. Despite my efforts, Liam's grief seemed to manifest in subtle ways. He avoided talking about James and seemed lost in his own world. On the rare occasions we did interact, his words were short and measured. I missed the days when we could laugh together without the heavy cloud of loss hanging over us. Things began to change slowly. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Liam surprised me by offering to help. It was the first time in months that he sought me out. We worked side by side in silence, and although it was a small gesture, it gave me hope that we were starting to find our way back to each other. In the weeks that followed, Liam began spending more time with me. He would sit with me in the living room while I watched TV, help me with household tasks, or simply linger nearby. He even started sharing bits of his life, his classes, his plans for college, and his dreams. For the first time in years, I felt like I was connecting with my son again. But just as I was beginning to feel hopeful, subtle shifts in his behavior left me questioning everything. His compliments became more personal, his glances lingered longer, and his presence felt different, closer, more intense. It was the start of something I wasn't ready to face. At first, I thought the changes in Liam's behavior were a natural part of his grief. I told myself he was simply trying to reconnect after we had both spent so much time grieving separately. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't ignore the strange, subtle shifts that were happening between us. It started with small things, a lingering glance, a comment that felt a little too personal. One morning, as I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes, Liam walked in and said, "You look really nice today, Mom." His tone was soft, almost tender. I thanked him and brushed it off, but something about the way he looked at me made my stomach tighten. Another time, we were sitting on the couch watching a movie we'd seen a dozen times before. Liam chose to sit closer than usual, our shoulders almost touching. When I shifted slightly to create space, he didn't move away. Instead, he turned to me and said, "You work so hard. You never take time for yourself." His voice was gentle but insistent. I laughed nervously, dismissing his comment, but deep down, I couldn't shake the unease it stirred in me. As the days went on, his compliments became more frequent and more intimate. "You make this house feel alive," he said one afternoon while I folded laundry. Another time, as I was cooking dinner, he stood close beside me and said, "You deserve to be taken care of, Mom." Each comment felt loaded with meaning I didn't want to acknowledge. Liam also began finding reasons to be near me. If I was in the kitchen, he would come in to talk. If I went to the garden to clear my mind, he would follow and sit beside me, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing stories about his day. I tried to convince myself that he was just seeking comfort, a way to fill the void left by his father. But the intensity in his eyes and the way he spoke to me suggested something more. Late one evening, as I lay in bed reading, I heard a soft knock at my door. "Mom!" His voice was hesitant. When I opened the door, Liam stood there, his expression unreadable. "I just wanted to talk," he said. I hesitated but invited him in. As he sat at the edge of my bed, I couldn't help but notice how vulnerable he looked. "I'm sorry if I've made you feel uncomfortable," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His words startled me, and I quickly assured him that everything was fine. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The unease between us grew. I started noticing myself becoming hyper-aware of his presence, my own emotions caught in a whirlwind of confusion. I told myself I was imagining things, that Liam was just trying to reconnect. But the tension in the house was palpable, and I couldn't ignore the strange dynamic that was developing. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Liam turned to me and said, "I don't want to lose you, Mom." His voice was filled with emotion, and his eyes locked onto mine in a way that made my heart race. I assured him he wouldn't lose me, but I couldn't help feeling that we were standing on the edge of something I didn't fully understand. The cracks in our relationship were becoming impossible to ignore. Every interaction felt charged with unspoken tension, and I began to question whether I had done something to encourage it. I couldn't shake the feeling that our relationship was changing in a way I wasn't prepared for, a way that felt dangerous and forbidden. The tension between Liam and me was growing, though neither of us openly acknowledged it. Every interaction seemed to carry a weight that hadn't been there before, and the lines between what was normal and what wasn't became increasingly blurred. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I became acutely aware of how close Liam was sitting. His arm brushed against mine, and when I shifted to create some space, he leaned closer. "Are you cold?" he asked, his voice soft and full of concern. Before I could respond, he draped a blanket over both of us. The gesture was innocent enough, but the way his hand lingered on my arm made my breath catch. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking things. But as the movie continued, I felt his gaze on me more than on the screen. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye, only to find him staring at me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "What?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Nothing," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm just happy we're spending more time together." I smiled back, trying to mask the unease that was bubbling up inside me. "Me too," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. But the truth was I wasn't sure how I felt. The closeness between us was both comforting and unsettling, and I didn't know how to navigate the feelings that were starting to surface. The next day, Liam surprised me by making breakfast. "You deserve to be spoiled once in a while," he said as he set a plate of pancakes in front of me. His tone was light, but the look in his eyes was anything but. As I thanked him and took a bite, I felt his hand brush against mine. It was a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt of energy through me that I couldn't ignore. Over the following weeks, these moments became more frequent. Liam found reasons to touch my hand, my shoulder, my back, small, innocent gestures that felt anything but. His compliments became more personal, his presence more constant. At times, I found myself drawn to him in ways that left me feeling confused and guilty. He was my son, and yet, there was an undeniable connection between us that I couldn't explain or control. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the living room, Liam sat down beside me. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice filled with concern. I hesitated before responding, unsure of how much to reveal. "I've just had a lot on my mind," I said finally. "Is it about me?" he asked, his tone serious. I froze, the weight of his question hanging in the air. "Why would you think that?" I asked, forcing a laugh. "I don't know," he said, his gaze fixed on me. "I just feel like something's changed between us." I didn't know how to respond. The truth was he wasn't wrong. Something had changed, and I didn't know how to make sense of it. "We've both been through a lot," I said, hoping to steer the conversation in a safer direction. "Maybe we're just adjusting to everything." He nodded but didn't seem convinced. "I just don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "You won't," I assured him, placing a hand on his knee. The touch lingered longer than it should have, and when I realized it, I quickly pulled away. But the look in Liam's eyes told me he had noticed. That night, I lay in bed replaying our conversation in my mind. The way he looked at me, the way he touched my hand, it was all so confusing. I told myself I needed to set boundaries, to create some distance between us. But when I heard a soft knock at my bedroom door later that night, all my resolve crumbled. "Mom!" Liam's voice was hesitant, almost trembling. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's late, Liam," I said, trying to sound firm. I need to talk," he said. I sighed and set my book aside. "Okay, come in." He stepped inside, his expression vulnerable and uncertain. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What about us?" I asked, my throat tightening. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel." His words hit me like a freight train, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "Liam, you're my son," I said, my voice shaking. "What you're feeling, it's not right." "I know," he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I can't stop thinking about you. You've always been there for me, and I don't know how to make these feelings go away." I stared at him, my mind racing. I wanted to comfort him, to make him understand that what he was feeling wasn't real. But as I looked into his eyes, I felt a surge of emotions I couldn't explain. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Liam, we'll figure this out, I said softly. Together. The look in his eyes told me that this was just the beginning. The tension between Liam and me had reached a breaking point. Every moment we spent together felt charged, every glance loaded with emotions I couldn't fully understand or control. I told myself that things would settle down, that this was just a phase we needed to navigate. But deep down, I knew that we were on the edge of something I wasn't prepared to face. It was late one evening, well past midnight. I had gone to bed early, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past few weeks. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of Liam and the strange, forbidden feelings that had taken root between us. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into his actions. But the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. A soft knock at my bedroom door broke the silence. My heart leaped into my throat as I sat up, the faint glow of the bedside lamp illuminating the room. "Mom!" Liam's voice was hesitant, almost trembling. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. "It's late, Liam," I said, trying to sound firm. "What's wrong?" There was a pause before he replied. I need to talk." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Liam stepped inside. He looked vulnerable, his shoulders hunched and his hands shoved into his pockets. He stood in the doorway for a moment, as if unsure of whether to come closer. "What's on your mind?" I asked, patting the edge of the bed. He hesitated before sitting down, his movements slow and deliberate. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Liam broke the silence. "I've been feeling a lot of things," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't know how to deal with them." I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Liam, it's okay to feel confused," I said gently. "We've both been through a lot. But we need to remember that I'm your mom, and our relationship has boundaries." He nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "But I can't stop thinking about you." His confession hung in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at him, my mind racing. "Liam, what you're feeling isn't real," I said finally, my voice shaking. "It's a result of everything we've been through. You're young and you're confused. But this isn't right." He looked down, his shoulders slumping. "I know," he whispered. I needed to tell you." I didn't know what to say. The pain in his voice was raw, and it broke my heart to see him like this. "Liam, we'll get through this," I said softly. "Together." He nodded, but the look in his eyes told me that this conversation wasn't over. And I was right. The following evening, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone in an attempt to unwind. The house was quiet, and the rhythmic hum of the ceiling fan filled the room. I was just beginning to drift off when I heard the door creak open. My heart jumped as I turned to see Liam standing in the doorway. "Mom!" His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Liam, it's late," I said, sitting up. "What's wrong?" He stepped into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "I've been thinking about everything we talked about." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. "Liam, we've already discussed this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's nothing more to say." He hesitated, his gaze locking onto mine. "I know it's wrong," he said, his voice trembling. "But I can't help how I feel." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "Liam, you're my son," I said firmly. "What you're feeling, it's not healthy. It's not right." "I know," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. "But I don't know how to stop. You're the only one who's ever been there for me. You've always cared about me in a way no one else has." His words hit me like a freight train, and for a moment, I couldn't move or speak. I felt frozen, trapped in a whirlwind of emotions I didn't know how to process. "Liam, we need to set boundaries," I said finally, my voice shaking. "For both of our sakes." He nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I said, my heart breaking at the sight of him. "But this has to stop. We need to move forward, Liam. Together, but in the right way." He nodded again, standing up slowly. "Good night, Mom," he said, his voice barely audible. "Good night," I replied, watching as he left the room. When the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a shaky breath, the tension in my chest finally easing. But as I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. In the days that followed, Liam kept his distance, and I tried to act as though everything was normal. But the weight of his confession lingered, and I couldn't ignore the tension that still hung in the air. I hoped that acknowledging the situation and setting boundaries would help us both move forward. Yet deep down, I knew that we were standing on the edge of something I didn't fully understand. Or maybe I did, but I wasn't ready to admit it. One evening, as I was lying in bed, Liam knocked on my door again. This time, his expression was different, less hesitant, more determined. "Mom," he said, stepping into the room. "I need to tell you something." I sat up, my heart pounding. "Liam, we've talked about this," I said firmly. "There's nothing more to say." But this time his gaze didn't waver. "Please," he said, his voice steady. "Just listen." And in that moment, I realized that we had crossed a line we could never uncross. The days following Liam's final confession were a blur. The air in the house felt heavier than ever, and every interaction between us was laced with unspoken tension. I kept telling myself that I had done the right thing by setting boundaries, by reminding Liam of the line that could never be crossed. But the truth was, I felt like I had failed, both as a mother and as a person. Liam retreated into himself. He barely spoke to me, spending most of his time locked away in his room. When he did emerge, he avoided eye contact and kept his answers short, almost mechanical. It hurt to see him like that, but I didn't know how to reach him. Every time I thought about trying, the memory of his confession would flood my mind, and I would freeze. I threw myself into distractions, cleaning the house, tending to the garden, anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. How had it come to this? Had I done something to encourage it? Was there a way to fix it? One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Liam walked into the kitchen. His presence startled me, and I dropped the knife I was holding. "Liam," I said, turning to face him. "You scared me." "Sorry," he said quietly, his eyes downcast. An awkward silence stretched between us, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Liam, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. He nodded but didn't say anything. I gestured toward the dining table, and we both sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I struggled to find the right words, to say something that would ease the tension without reopening old wounds. "I know things have been difficult," I began carefully. "And I know I haven't handled everything perfectly. But we need to find a way to move forward." Liam looked up at me, his eyes filled with emotion. "I'm trying," he said softly. "But it's hard." "I know it is," I said, my heart aching for him. "But what you're feeling, it's not healthy, Liam. It's not right. We need to work through this together, but in a way that helps you move past it." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't know how to let it go," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I've tried, but it's like it's always there, in the back of my mind." His vulnerability broke my heart, and I reached out to take his hand. "Liam, I love you," I said firmly. "And I will always be here for you. But we have to put this behind us. It's the only way we can heal." He squeezed my hand tightly, as if afraid to let go. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. "You won't," I assured him. "But we need to set boundaries for both of our sakes." The conversation felt like a small step forward, but it didn't erase the lingering tension between us. Over the next few weeks, I tried to create more distance. I encouraged Liam to spend time with his friends, to focus on his schoolwork, and to think about his future. He seemed to respond, throwing himself into his studies and spending less time at home. But even as things appeared to improve on the surface, the weight of what had happened still hung over us. Every time I looked at Liam, I couldn't help but remember his words, the look in his eyes, the way he had confessed his feelings. It was a constant reminder of the fragile line we had crossed and the damage it had caused. The house felt quieter than ever, the silence almost suffocating. I missed the easy rapport we had once shared, the laughter, the light-hearted moments. But I knew that rebuilding our relationship would take time, and that it might never be the same again. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about James and how much I missed him, how his absence had created a void that neither Liam nor I had known how to fill. I thought about Liam's grief, his confusion, and his desperate need for connection. And I thought about my own role in everything, how I had let the lines blur, how I had failed to recognize the warning signs until it was too late. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the full extent of what had been lost. Not just James, but the trust and bond that had once existed between Liam and me. I didn't know if we could ever fully recover, but I knew I had to try. For both our sakes. The following morning, I sat Liam down and told him we needed to seek professional help. Someone who could guide us through the healing process and help us rebuild our relationship. He was hesitant at first, but eventually he agreed. It was a difficult conversation, but it felt like a step in the right direction. As we began the journey toward healing, I reminded myself that this wasn't just about fixing what had been broken. It was about finding a way to move forward, to create a new normal that was healthier and stronger than what had come before. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to try. The decision to seek professional help was the turning point. Liam and I began attending therapy sessions together, hesitant at first, but hopeful that we could find a way to repair what had been broken. The therapist, a warm and understanding woman named Dr. Walker, created a safe space for us to speak honestly. It wasn't easy to confront our emotions, but it felt like the first real step toward healing. In those sessions, I learned just how deeply Liam had been affected by James's death. Losing his father at such a pivotal age had left him adrift, searching for stability in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar and unkind. He admitted that his feelings for me had been born out of grief, confusion, and a desperate need to hold on to the one person who had always been there for him. Hearing him say those words was both heartbreaking and eye-opening. I realized that I had been so focused on my own grief that I hadn't fully understood how much Liam was struggling. His need for connection had become tangled with his pain, leading to feelings that neither of us knew how to handle. Dr. Walker helped us unpack the complexity of those emotions, guiding Liam to separate his feelings of love and admiration from the inappropriate attachment that had developed. She encouraged him to channel his energy into building healthy relationships outside our family, reminding him that his emotions, while real, didn't define him. For my part, therapy forced me to confront my own role in the situation. I had blurred boundaries in my attempt to comfort Liam, inadvertently fostering an environment where his feelings could grow unchecked. It was a difficult truth to face, but one I needed to acknowledge if I wanted to rebuild our relationship. Over time, Liam began to heal. He started spending more time with his friends, focusing on his studies, and rediscovering hobbies he had abandoned after James's death. I saw glimpses of the young man he had been before our lives were upended, and it gave me hope that we could move past the darkness. As the weeks turned into months, the tension in our home began to ease. Conversations felt lighter, laughter returned, and the heaviness that had once defined our interactions slowly dissipated. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was progress. Through it all, I carried the weight of my own guilt. I questioned whether I had failed as a mother, whether I could have prevented what had happened if I had acted differently. But Dr. Walker reminded me that healing isn't about assigning blame. It's about learning from the past and moving forward with intention and care. The experience changed me. It taught me the importance of boundaries, of recognizing when to seek help, and of facing uncomfortable truths head-on. It also deepened my understanding of grief and its ability to distort our emotions, reminding me that even in our darkest moments, there is a path to recovery if we're willing to take it. Today, Liam and I are in a better place. Our relationship isn't the same as it was before, but it has grown stronger in its own way. We've learned to communicate more openly, to support each other without crossing boundaries, and to cherish the bond we share as mother and son. I've also found solace in knowing that our story can serve as a lesson to others. Life is messy, and grief can lead us down unexpected and painful paths. But it's never too late to seek help, to make amends, and to rebuild what has been broken. As I reflect on everything that has happened, I hold on to the hope that we've emerged stronger. Not despite the challenges we faced, but because of them. And I'm reminded that even in the face of our greatest struggles, love and forgiveness have the power to heal. What would you do if you found yourself in a situation like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that tackle life's most complicated and taboo moments. Your engagement means the world to me, and there's so much more to explore together. Stay tuned for next week's story. It's one you won't want to miss.